Okay, so for muscular system, we just need to go through a little bit of some functions and some other things. So there's four basic functions with the muscular system. Obviously, the main function is to provide movement for us. So it's the only way that we can actually move our skeleton or move things around inside of our body is through some sort of muscular contraction. One of the big things we have to remember, though, is that muscles don't push; they pull. All right. A lot of times when you think about that, like if you're doing a push up, all right, you think that your muscles are actually pushing in that direction. Well, it's not the actual push in that direction. It's the muscles pulling on the bones to create that movement. All right. So muscles always pull. Another thing they do for us is help us maintain our posture. All right. A lot of us right now, our posture is awful because of e-learning, but it is what it is. All right. They also help stabilize joints. So a lot of times, people, especially when they come into our athletic training room, they're like, "Oh, I have a bad ankle." Well, it's not like your ankle goes out late at night or things like that. All right. It's most likely because of muscular stability. All right. The ligamentous stability we really can't do anything for, but the muscular stability we can. So if you've got some sort of an issue with a joint, a knee, an ankle, a shoulder, it's most likely because of some sort of muscular imbalance. And then the last thing it does for us is help generate our heat. Most of our body heat is generated by muscle contractions. The rest of it is then generated by metabolism. Okay. All right. With the muscular system, we've got three basic types of muscle tissue. We're going to talk about each one of them here in just a second. So we've got skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle, and then smooth muscle. We're going to spend most of our time in this unit talking about skeletal muscle. We've already talked a little bit about cardiac during the heart unit, and we've talked somewhat about smooth muscle during the digestive unit. But we're going to primarily spend most of our time with skeletal muscle during this unit. Okay. Real quickly, some of the characteristics then. All right, so muscle cells of the skeletal muscle system are kind of elongated. All right, meaning they're kind of cylinder in shape. When we talk about muscle cells, we're simply talking about muscle fibers. All right, so those two are kind of one and the same a lot of times when we talk about them. All right, the contraction of those muscles is actually due to the movement of those little microfilaments, those actin and myosin that you might have heard of before. There are a lot of terms that you're going to see in this unit that all deal with kind of a couple of things. These are the three basic ones that we kind of remember. So if you hear the word myo, that means muscle. Mice also means muscle, right? Which isn't fair, but we've got a couple of root words that all mean the same thing, but that's what happens sometimes. And then you're going to hear another one a couple different times called sarco, which sarco then is simply just flesh. Okay. So those are our three basic kind of things we'll talk about during this unit. We'll kind of go over those. Other skeletal muscle characteristics. All right, pretty much all of our skeletal muscle are attached to some type of tendon that attaches it to a bone. All right, we don't have any muscles that directly attach to a bone. You normally have a tendon that do that. Skeletal muscle cells are multinucleated, which means they have multiple nucleuses. All right. They are also striated. We got these kind of bands that you see in the picture here that go straight up and down, the vertical. And they are the only type that we have that is voluntary, meaning that we can consciously control them. All right. There are some times where it feels like we cannot consciously control them when you have a cramp or you've fallen asleep on your arm and things like that. But for the most part, we've got conscious control over that skeletal muscle tissue. Okay. We got a couple connective tissue wrappers that go around muscle tissue. All right. That we need to kind of remember here. So I'll kind of scroll up a little bit. All right. We have what's referred to as the endomysium. All right. This is what actually wraps around a single muscle fiber. Okay. So you can see this is the single fiber here. And that would be endomysium that kind of wraps around the outside of it. The next one is paramysium. All right. That actually wraps around what's called a fascicle or a bundle of those fibers. Okay. The next section is an epimysium. This is what actually covers the entire skeletal muscle. Okay, and then there's what's called fascia, which is on the outside of that epimysium that a lot of times connects muscles to muscles. All right, so if we would have got a chance to get in and kind of dissect the cat, you would see a lot of this fascia when you separate a lot of muscle tissues. If you've ever like kind of cut up chicken or any other type of kind of food, there's a lot of times what almost looks like spider web like looking material between muscles. All right, that's kind of what separates those into different pieces there. Okay. I would say one of the things, I know that this is a page in your workbook, guys. This diagram right here. All right, I would make sure you take a look at that. That's probably a fair game question on the assessment where we might ask the different labeled sections of this. So just make sure you take a look at it and know that you've got your endo, para, epi, and then fascia as it kind of goes out. There probably is going to be a question that kind of deals with that. Okay. Skeletal muscle attachment, we kind of talked about this. So the epimysium actually blends into kind of these tendons and what are referred to as aponeuroses. All right. So the tendons are just these little cord-like structures that directly attach a muscle to a bone. A lot of times you can feel a lot of these tendons at joints. So if you make like a bicep tendon or make a bicep contraction, you can feel that bicep tendon right in your elbow. Your hamstring tendons are other ones that are really easy to feel kind of on the backside of your knee, real close to your joint. And then your Achilles tendon is another real easy one to kind of find on the back part of your leg there. These aponeuroses are actually kind of sheets of connective tissue that separate large muscle groups. So we've got aponeuroses that actually connect a lot of the muscles in our skull. Okay. And then when there's also aponeuroses that connect the muscles of our abdomen. Right. So our abdominal muscles are separated by aponeuroses, and they're just kind of these big sheets of connective tissue. Okay. Sites of muscle attachment, you've got a couple different ones here. Bone, obviously. There are some that will attach into cartilage. The upper portion of your bicep tendon actually goes in and attaches into your labrum, which is a piece of cartilage in your shoulder. All right. And then there are several of them that will actually attach to connective tissues. All right. So your quadriceps and your hamstrings connect to this broad band of tissue that runs down the outside of your leg called your IT band. Right, which a lot of times is why people have lower leg issues, is because those muscles are either tight or weak, right? And then that IT band kind of can create some issues. Smooth muscle tissue, on the other hand, just some of the characteristics of it. All right, big ones. There's no striations. All right, they're kind of spindle shaped, so they're skinny on the edges and kind of fat in the center. I'm going to draw a really bad example here. All right, so they're kind of have this fat section in the center, and then this really skinny section or on the edges. All right, and then they've got the one nucleus that kind of sits here in the center. Okay, so single nucleus. They're involuntary, meaning we can't control them, and we usually find them in a lot of the hollow organs that we have in the body. Okay, small intestine, large intestine, esophagus. All right, trachea. A lot of those places that we would have that are kind of those basic hollow organs. Your stomach would have smooth muscle tissue in it. All right, but those would be examples that we see there. Okay. Cardiac muscle tissue, on the other hand, does have striations, which sometimes can make it hard to kind of pick out from skeletal muscle. All right. The other thing, though, is it usually has a single nucleus. It's joined together by these little things called intercalated discs. So if we look at the diagram over here to the right, you see these really dark bands that kind of run down through those striations. Those are those intercalated discs. All right. It's also involuntary. We can't really control it. And the only place we're going to find that one is in the heart. Okay. Muscle tissue kind of organization. All right. I would say that this is probably another fair game kind of question. You might have to put these in order or be asked what would come next. So just make sure you take a look at those. So this is going from largest to smallest. All right. So obviously the largest thing that we have is a muscle. All right. Next in line is going to be the fascicle. So that's a group of muscle fibers that make up the muscle. So most muscles have several fascicles in them. All right. The next one in line is going to be a muscle fiber itself. So that's a single muscle fiber or a single cell. Right. Inside of that muscle fiber is going to be myofilaments. Those are your actin and myosin that we'll talk about here in a second. All right. The next thing you have in line from there is the sarcomere. This is kind of the cell membrane, if you will, of the muscle cell. Okay. And then the last thing we have are kind of these little myofilaments on the inside. Okay. So again, like I said, this is probably a fair game question. They might ask which one's the smallest, which one's the largest, right? Or there's a chance you might have to put them in order, right? It's usually some things that kind of show up. Okay. Microscopic anatomy here. So again, just remember, so muscle cells, so we're talking about muscle cells here, skeletal muscle. So again, they're multinucleated. All right, the nuclei are just below that sarcolemma. So the sarcolemma is this wrapper you see kind of around the outside of this diagram here. So the sarcolemma essentially is that cell membrane that goes around a bunch of these. Okay. Other things we need to kind of remember, again, the sarcolemma is kind of that specialized plasma membrane. All right, and then there is this thing called sarcoplasmic reticulum. All right, it's a type of smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and it's involved in moving things around inside of the muscle cell. So a lot of times, this is how ATP and protein and calcium and sodium and things kind of move around inside of that cell. Right, we've got just a little bit left. All right. The next thing we're going to talk a little bit about are kind of these myofibrils. All right. So these are just bundles of myofilaments. Okay. So they're bundles of actin and myosin cells that are kind of arranged in these cylindrical patterns. Okay. And they give them the kind of these distinctive bands. All right. So when you see a skeletal muscle, you see that there are light bands and dark bands. All right. The I band is the light band. So that's the area where there's only one of those two types of fibers. Okay. So those are usually the actin filaments. Okay. So the light band is the actin. The dark band is where there is both I can spell. All right. The dark band is where we see both actin and myosin fibers together. Okay. That's usually a pretty standard question a lot of times that we see. Which ones are dark bands? Which ones are light? Okay. And then the entire segment that we normally talk about as part of a muscle fiber is this sarcomere. So this is the single contractile unit that's inside of a muscle fiber. And it's usually defined as what's called the Z disc to Z disc or kind of I band to I band. So Z line to Z line. So this right here kind of zigzags back and forth is what they a lot of times call that Z line. So this would be that contractile unit we're kind of talking about. So when a muscle fiber actually shortens, this is the part that's shortening, is that distance between the Z lines. All right. The myosin fibers reach out and attach to the actin and actually pull them closer to each other. All right. So it kind of shortens that basic portion. So the distance between these two would get smaller when the muscle actually contracts. Okay. When you see those. All right. We're going to go ahead and stop there. You guys got any questions? You guys all good? That lecture is already posted. I'll get the recorded part up in case